So very nice to see you all. My name is Kris Thórisson. I will be giving you my perspective. As Pei mentioned, we all have our perspective. AGI is a very early enterprise, even though people have been talking for a while as if it was at least 50 years old. I'll be following pretty roughly, I should say, the outline that you see online for my topics. The topics will be in there somewhere. If you feel like something needs to be clarified, you can raise your arm. We will take questions as they come. If it gets too much, I'll say, well, we need to move on. And you can keep that thought in your head and ask at another opportunity. What I hope to give you, here's a short list. I would like to deepen your understanding of why we need different methodologies in AI versus computer science in general, and in particular, the need for different methodologies in AGI. I will also be covering a methodology that we've been working on, myself and my collaborators, and has a lot in common actually with Pei Wang's approach. And this is in fact, I still haven't found anyone who is as close to my own thinking as Pei's thinking is. And possibly I should say it the other way around because I think he was there before me. But in any case, there seems to be a large overlap, and we arrived at that independently. So we have tended to talk a lot about these issues, but we haven't had the chance to really work closely together yet. I'm sure that will happen in the near future. I also hope that you will have a broadened view of learning, and but especially machine learning. Possibly some insight into state-of-the-art and current limitations, although that will be more indirect than direct. I'm not going to cover any of the traditional machine learning techniques here. And AI's role in studying natural intelligence. I'll also tell you about AERA, our own architecture that we've been working on for 5 years now, and a new programming language that we've developed for this, as well as the constructivist methodology that we're following. So I'd like to do a quick survey here of your backgrounds, because I like to know who I'm talking to. It makes it probably easier for you, but it also makes it easier for me. And so raise your hand if you consider yourself to have a solid background in computer science. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11. Okay, I'm going to jot these down and put them in later. So, how about basic background in computer science? Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Okay, this would be A, B, X. How about the good old-fashioned AI, as in traditional AI, as it's taught in introductory classes? 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay. And basic background, sort of rudimentary? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Behavior-based AI. Anyone know what that is, even? Okay. So 1.
Statistical methods.
No.
No.
No. If you're familiar with Rodney Brooks's work and in robotics, this is traditionally what came out of that work in the mid 80s or so, 80s to late 90s, and is essentially the beginning of the Roomba vacuum cleaner. Okay, so I guess 0 and 0. AGI, solid background. Okay, that's why you're here. Good. Basic background, basic knowledge. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that would be D. A, 0, B, 7. Okay, interesting. I have some more. Just bear with me. It's only 2 slides. So, developmental robotics. Okay, either solid or basic. No one. 1. Okay. 2. Okay. Okay. So A, 0, B, 2, or 3, depending on how we count. Cognitive science. Solid background. 1. No, you're a generalist. It doesn't count. well, let's put 1 down. So we have something. It's more fun. Okay. Basic background, cognitive science. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, 7. Psychology, other than cog sci. Someone? Solid or basic?
Solid.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Uh-huh.
11 years ago.
Okay.
Still counts.
Okay.
Used to be solid.
Yeah.
And finally, philosophy. Solid background in philosophy. Oh, good. 2. How about basic? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, okay. Okay, it's not far from what I expected. Although I'm surprised no one has heard of behavior-based AI. But maybe it's just a US thing. So I'm not going to ask you where the country you're from, because I think we have that information anyway. But I know there are at least 1 or 2 here from the US, right? 3, okay. So anyway, my lecture format for the next few days will be essentially fairly standard. I'm going to talk a lot, and you're going to listen a lot. It just seems to be somehow how things turn out. But also, I think for the benefit of those watching these videotapes that we're making afterwards, I think it's better that they're a bit more structural. But I will try to make sure that we have some periods where we can also just have discussions. And on that note, I would really encourage you to register on MindMakers, because then you will be able to use the forum questions that we will put up, or at least I will use. I don't know about Pei and Ben, but I will be putting up for each lecture a thread that you can then post questions to. And I will do that after today, so that tonight and tomorrow morning you can fill in some questions. I will then look at them and address them as I see fit. So if you ask good questions, you're very likely to be answered, or at least given some attempt to answer. So anyway, I think that should also maybe help spur some discussions. Okay, so, well, we already know that this is an AGI Summer School. So we don't need to maybe delve too deeply into that. But I still wanted to make sure that you know that what I have in mind is a particular angle on that. And the task is to design and implement generally intelligent systems. Okay, so what does that mean? These systems should be able to learn to perform a host of unanticipated, vastly different tasks, and adapt to vastly new circumstances, and actively acquire new knowledge for the above as needed, on their own accord. Now, I need to emphasize these things because it seems, when you read it through quickly, that it's not very different from AI. But really, the standard run-of-the-mill AI does not make this their requirement or goal. They also do not talk about this at all. They don't talk about systems There's a spelling error there. They don't talk too much about systems acquiring new knowledge so much as acquiring knowledge that's been predefined, or at least the area of the knowledge. And they also don't talk about autonomy too much, and we'll get back to this several times in the coming days. So these are really key things. Just to set the stage a little bit better, still, I want to give you some a priori assumptions that I have in my mind when I think about this field of work, AI, AGI, computer science, etc. So research in AI is about intelligence. It's about intelligence. This is a central part of AI. It's not computers that are the central part. It's about intelligence, okay? And this has two sides. We just want to know. We want to know how things work. We're curious. This is what drives part of scientific work. Obviously, of course, if there was no utility in it ever, and foreseeable so, probably there wouldn't be too much funding. We can only fund curiosity for its own sake for so long. But in fact, it's as the university environment has shown over the past few hundred years, it is a very good way to guarantee continuous progress in knowledge acquisition for the human race over extended periods of time, way longer than any individual or even a small group could do. So having it a social thing and having it a global thing extends the range of practicality over hundreds of years. There's also a practical angle. We want intelligent machines to do stuff for us. And as, of course, we've seen with the Roomba vacuum cleaner, is anyone here not familiar with this gadget? Okay, good. So the Roomba vacuum cleaner is an excellent example, along with expert systems of the 80s and early 90s, of good old-fashioned AI. And I'll use that many times, as I'll refer back to that many times. So the assumption here, at least in my mind, is that any natural intelligence can be the target of engineered intelligence. So basically, we could take a squirrel or an octopus or whatever intelligence in nature and make some subset or completely it's the full intelligence of that example our target for for what we want to engineer. It just so happens, of course, I mentioned that the computer is not at the center. Well, it just happens that computers are really the by far easiest way to do this at the moment. So there's really no other alternative or choice that we can make, frankly. A bit more of these. If we aim for human level intelligence, and possibly beyond, we should hope that the methods we apply will bring us where we want to go. So whether we aim for some machine type intelligence that has some features of human intelligence but has also other features that humans don't have, doesn't really matter so much if that machine isn't capable of some basic things that humans are capable of, like learning new things. Because that machine is just going to be so much more less useful than the other version.
That's an example.
Yes.
I have arrived to AGI over the process of years slowly and learning about it. But one of the comments I have, I want to make it, so thank you for the opportunity of saying this, is that even human level intelligence is largely not understood, not defined, and certainly not used. I have given some example of humans doing perfectly stupid things as a routine. Hurting themselves, hurting the planet, for example, in say, how come that we call human the most intelligent animals
Mhm.
and yet they behave so stupidly all the time?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a note. That
Yes.
I'm actually hoping that AGI will create more intelligent machines, at the same time help us discover the weaknesses of
Yeah.
of underused human.
Yeah. Okay, those are great points. First of all, why is human intelligence always, it seems to be at the center of this discussion? And that's a perfect opportunity for me to slide in here. One of the things I wanted to tell you, which is, and if you've read my notes already online, you know this, but my view is that basically, after having talked to so many people from so many different backgrounds about AI and human behavior, of course, everyone is concerned with human behavior in one way or another, unless they're a hermit living in the woods, raised by wolves. There is so much disagreement with how to look at intelligence, how to define it, how to understand it, what it is, etc., that I've pretty much given up on on that effort, with the exception that the only thing that everyone seems to agree on is that there are at least some humans who are somewhat intelligent some of the time. So that's why it's really just a kind of a useful starting point. It's nothing more than that. And I think absolutely, and that's another very good point, that possibly AI or AGI efforts will help us understand better the pros and cons of the current expressions of human intelligence in our societies and on the planet. And I think that's true for at least in two senses. One is that I really do think, and you don't have to take my word for it, you can think about this, but I think AI is really a necessary component of any study of intelligence, no matter what kind of intelligence, because it's like astrophysics. You can't really move the planets around to do experiments with the planets. All you have is a telescope and you observe. So what do people do? They make simulations, and AI is exactly that platform. It's the only way, really, to move beyond the very limited observational tools we have for looking at intelligent behavior, however you define it. And the other sense is that possibly we will create benevolent machines who will do some good for the planet. And that's of course also my hope. But looking at the human intelligence that controls this process, I'm not convinced that, well, let's put it this way, a bit more hopeful. It's hard for me to see exactly how that will turn out.
Thank you for taking the time.
So, back to methodologies. Okay, we want to get someplace, and as I said, we put the human in the center because I'm hoping that it's something at least we all can agree on, is an example. Well, what is the best way to get to such a state where we actually understand intelligence well enough that we can implement it in various forms to various ends at various cost? What is the form of, what's the methodology that we should follow? And really, the key question here is about methodology. So, most AI researchers will say that they're using the standard scientific method that's worked for millennia and or an engineering approach. It's very much based on sort of a pragmatic utilitarian foundation at this point. Not very many read philosophy in AI. Some percentage, of course. I'm not sure how big that is. But it's very clear that progress in AI is not what we had hoped for. I don't think I'm telling you any news here. Because if we look at the predictions that people made in the past, if we agree with the US version of history, which is where I was trained, AI kind of started, well, it kind of began with Turing, but it really took off at the Dartmouth conference in '56. And of course, there was work before that in cybernetics and so on that led to it. I'm not sure how much time I'll get to delve into cybernetics, but it's a very interesting path that history has taken with Turing arriving on the scene. But in the early days, people were very optimistic. For example, Marvin Minsky is quoted as having said that the vision problem will be solved this summer, and I think he hired one student to do it. And every decade, there was someone predicting that within a decade, there will be a machine that beats the world champion in chess. The first computer to beat a human world champion was in 1997. So it was quite a bit later than they had hoped, but it did happen. And the premise, the original premise, and the reason that at least researchers at CMU and probably Turing himself suggested studying board games like chess is that it seemed to them that any system that could really play chess well would have to be intelligent. So you couldn't solve really how to beat a world champion at chess unless you solved the general intelligence problem. And you know that Herbert and Simon built this general problem solver in the late 50s or early 60s. And so it comes as a big surprise to us that after the victory, IBM dismantled the program. Deep Blue, as you've seen, didn't play any more chess games because IBM was so excited about this new AI that could be the world champion that they really worked hard to see how they could apply this to everything else. Of course, being generally intelligent, you'd think it would be put into everything, including wireless routers, laptops, etc. And maybe made the head of IBM to figure out what to work on next. Well, several years after the victory, they were still struggling to figure out how to use this for anything else. And that includes, everything that they're working at IBM. It wasn't relevant to anything. Okay, so the prediction was really worse than mediocre. It was terrible. It was essentially couldn't have been more wrong. Interesting, huh? And of course, the vision problem is still not solved and no obvious solution in sight, although many will claim it is. So, I think we need to go back to this. What is this thing? And I will go through now in a few dozen slides my view on that. So first, intelligence is nature's way to deal with complexity. And you'll notice a word there, predictability, that doesn't enter very much into standard AI at all. But this is essentially what intelligence does. It predicts what may happen so that the individual harboring the intelligence can survive. Why? To produce more offspring so that the species can live on. Now, it sounds like some sort of purpose is built in. It's really not the case. It's just that patterns in nature that tend to have that structure live on, and others disappear. Now, complexity in nature sits somewhere between complete randomness, which cannot be predicted by definition, and complete rigidity, which of course is perfectly predictable. So this is the continuum. Somewhere in there we have the world, the universe, with its rules, and complex causal chains. So this is what intelligence is for. It's for figuring out, and in order to predict, some subset of the complex causal chains that nature implements. Because that is the only way that some animals on this planet survive. Of course, there are animals and there are life forms that are like viruses that are fairly special and very simple, but many of them require other animals which have higher complexity. In any case, I don't want to delve too deeply into that, but this is really it. I mean, intelligence exists because of nature, and if nature was perfectly random, there would be no intelligence. If it was perfectly rigid, you wouldn't need intelligence, and you wouldn't need to learn anything. Well, maybe you need to learn. Well, no, you could encode it. Yeah, you could say it this way. A species could evolve, and then after that, it could be completely brainless, because it was all of the patterns for behavior for that species were encoded in its DNA. Yeah.
You wrote in your written materials that intelligence is a mechanism for limitation of this complexity that we deal to perceive. And now you're coming to this point, and when it is perfectly arranged, there are still place for choices.
True.
Because in perfectly arranged
Yeah.
environment, there could be some ways you should choose, and that's for you need intelligence again.
Yeah, that's true. So actually, if you take that a bit further and analyze it, you could say, well, you could have a very complex maze, let's say, that never changes, but is still enormous, and it has no repeating patterns. Sure. And then it, of course, depends on the memory of the agents that, how they would deal with that. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that's true. Good point. Thank you.
Kris,
Yeah.
sorry, a minute. No, back, wait.
Oh. Okay. So this cyborg needs batteries changed. Thank you. What have we heard in our culture and in standard teaching materials about what intelligence is? How do lay people characterize it? Well, actually, not many lay people have thought about it too much, but if you take an average human, if you take a human of average intelligence and you ask them to think about it for like 5 minutes, they might come up with something like this. Intelligence is knowing what and knowing how to. And if you have those two, you have an intelligence system. So let's say a robot that knows how to ride a bike, and it knows what parts of the bike are, so it can step on the bike and hold the handlebars and pedal and bike. Okay, so you'd be hard pressed saying that system is not intelligent. And actually, this is pretty close to what standard AI has been saying. We'll go through this a bit in more detail. So knowing things means internalized information, being able to access it in various ways, associatively via similarity, like vision and hearing. Let's say this robot needs to hear the cars coming and needs to slow down if there's a loud noise, etc. But symbolically, maybe it needs to read the traffic signs as well, so you've got that. And now, maybe we up the ante and say, well, it can do actually more stuff than that. It knows things, but it doesn't just know how to ride a bike, it knows other things as well. For humans, of course, we have very complex things that we use symbol reading and knowing how to and knowing what, like getting a promotion, or buying the cheapest salad, or driving a car, or winning on Jeopardy. So this is an American game. Who has heard of the Jeopardy challenge that IBM? Okay. Who has not heard of it? What's it called? Watson. Yeah, not Deep something. Okay. Watson, IBM's computer that won this game against humans. Okay. So anyway, I'm just trying to understand who I'm talking to. In any case, let's just wrap this up and say, okay, well, this is the standard way of looking at intelligence. It's the ability to do X, where X is something reasonably complex, like playing chess, or vacuuming the floor, driving through the desert, or doing a chat. And the funny thing is, this is the Turing test, actually. And you'll see in a bit why this is such a terrible way, really, to hold on to in thinking about intelligence. I mean, Turing was way ahead of his time. He was a brilliant guy, etc. But the way people cling to this idea is very strange. Because it's not like we have better ideas. It's just that somehow he's become this monumental, overpowering figure somehow. But I won't talk too much about that unless you really press me or ask me questions later. So one of the things that is really missing, obviously, is the ability to know how to and to know what, is that we have excluded the ability to learn. Obviously, that would be nice to have learning in there, right? And now if we talk about learning, well, there's speed of learning, there's retention of what's learned, there's the ability to apply what's been learned, there's the ability to not forget what you learned before if you learn something new, etc. So let's say that this is the new version of the common view. This is why we hear so much about deep learning and the project that Google did last year or the year before, I forget. No, I think it was last year. With a computer vision system that learned to identify the image of cats in videos. Not a trivial task, of course, but after this summer school, I think, or I hope you will have a better way of understanding how terribly short along the way towards AGI that is, in fact. So now let's say, okay, we've got this thing here. We've included learning and performing to do these things. But this, of course, ignores the ability to learn a number of things. And that's what humans can do. And that includes transfer of learning. If you learn one thing, you get better at another thing because you gain insights somehow, or you get trained in a way that transfers nicely. We, of course, balance all sorts of goals, and we balance tasks. We do multitasking, some of us, anyway. And we manage our mental resources via what's called attention, typically. And we make plans. And we learn to learn. We get better at learning. So we learn to learn better. Now, in fact, this list is very long. I could go on for days, probably, even at this very high level of abstraction. It's a very interesting thing. And once we start to try to write down all of the cognitive things that are at the same level of granularity, like vacuuming the floor or doing the dishes, or this is the level of detail that, say, roboticists using state-of-the-art AI are working with today. And I tend to use robotics a lot because, to me, if people don't address the perception issue, that is the controlled intake of information, I don't consider them serious players in the AGI game. Although there may be exceptions to that, and you'll see a bit more of this as we go on. But just as an exercise, let's break down that top box there, just to show you what I'm thinking of. So now, this could be a very long list. These are some of the things that humans know how to and what about. Okay? When I say knowing what, I mean knowing facts, knowing what things are, etc. Okay? It's a long list. I mean, it goes on for a lot longer than this. And in fact, if we zoom out, probably it has even more than that. It's probably more like this, if we really sat down and listed all of the things. Okay. Of course, if we did that, we'd have to figure out how to be consistent about the level of detail, because we don't want to mix two. I mean, for example, writing a letter, it requires knowing something about envelopes and the post office, etc. So that's like knowing what. Also, where you put the addresses, the to and the from address on the envelope, etc. But writing a letter and putting it in the envelope, well, writing the letter, of course, requires you to be able to write and read, because you have to read what you wrote. If you well, it depends on what kind of a machine you are. But if you are a machine that tends to forget, then maybe you want to check to see if you forgot anything, etc. So anyway, you very quickly then come to the realization that, we learn all these skills, but then we mix and match them. And we do that without thinking. I mean, we even have to go to a summer school on AGI to be told that this is hard. So I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming myself, because it took me forever to really, be able to say this so explicitly and obviously, so that it sounds silly. But that's, sometimes it takes a while to just see what's in front of us. So what I wanted to tell you is that general intelligence is all of the above, but it's more. We don't know just a variety of facts and have a variety of skills, and using a variety of means and a variety of sensors. We generalize from experience. We turn facts into skills and skills into facts. We anticipate the future. We draw useful analogies between unrelated things even, and so on and so on. And perhaps most interestingly, we can learn about ourselves, in fact. I'll leave it at that for now. Learning, so many kinds. And this is something that keeps getting forgotten, especially in mainstream media, but even in the general AI literature. People just use this term learning, and by that they mean machine learning, and by that they mean actually the state of the art as far as today. And so you come with something like new system that learns by observation, and you can't figure out which journal to publish in, because they're all defined in the back view mirror. They all think like, what have we done before? That's how we define ourselves. So we never published anything on observational learning. So it's not proper machine learning, really, because machine learning has to have lots of math, and here's this guy with a very loose idea. Now, I didn't take that example just out of the blue. You will see what the AERA system is capable of. And I'll tell you a little bit, not too much, but a little bit about the work we're having to do to figure out where to send it. So It's quite fascinating. And so all of academia is actually designed around this idea that you define yourself in the back view mirror by what's come before, instead of really thinking about defining yourself in terms of what comes, what may come later. Because that's really, you need to educate people in anticipation of the future. Of course, a good university will have realized this, and they'll say, well, we need to teach them what has been figured out so far, and also teach them how to learn new things by themselves. Because we're not going to say what's going to happen in the future, but if we teach them to learn well, they'll be ready. So, okay, that's a decent approximation, but I'm not very happy with it. I think something needs to be done about that. Okay, anyway, so there's a lot of styles of learning. Not styles, I should say, types of learning. And psychology has already plucked out some learning types that humans do every day. But even psychologists tend to isolate things and box them in and say, okay, now I'm studying reinforcement learning. And at one time in history, for those of you who know some psychology, the behaviorists, of course, said, there is no other learning than reinforcement learning. Or they didn't say that, but that's essentially what was possible to read between the lines. So effectively, they were saying, okay, there's one style of learning, and we can explain everything from that. Oh, and by the way, we're gonna ignore the fact that people have a brain and a mind, and we're just going to study what's observable. Now, I don't know where they got their training in the history of science, but would we have had a theory of atoms if the smallest thing you can see is a grain of sand? So, oh, we're going to study only the observable. Yeah, okay, so grains of sand, that's where it ends. Okay, so we'll explain the universe in terms of grains of sand. It's the smallest observable unit. I don't know where we'd be, but certainly not here today with this projector and stuff. So it's a very, so history, I'm just giving you that as an example to prepare you that some of the stuff that Pei and I and Ben will be telling you may sound like we're, disrespectful of the work that's already been done by many of our colleagues. And of course, to some extent, that's true. But the strange thing is that it seems like whole fields can go astray for decades, at least. And the standard, and I think it all gets tied back to this idea, or this style of defining yourself in the back view mirror. Because once you start to do that, you become very skeptical of new ideas. But is really what science is about. Now, it's actually like this. You've got sort of a curve. Ooh, don't want to mess that up. Sort of like this. As long as you're one standard deviation within the style of published papers already, and we're talking topics and language here, then if it's a new thing, it gets published. If it's well written and it's a new thing, it gets published. Okay? Your peers will like it. But if you're, say, 3 standard deviations off, people have to exert themselves more to really understand it. Partly because you have to use other language than they're used to. And look, they only gave themselves an hour and a half to review your paper. Now, that's a fact. I mean, people don't take whole days off to read a paper. That doesn't happen. I mean, it may happen once in a decade. But if you're using that kind of off the beaten path language, if you're forced to do it to explain your ideas, then you really are saying, well, I'm reducing my chances of getting published. So what happens is that effect pushes, we don't use chalk at RU, sorry. I'm out of practice. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love it. We also don't have this high level of humidity. Probably explains it as well. Anyway, so it pushes everyone into the standard deviation, and that means you're not allowed to think. Sorry for the phrase outside of the box. Well, you're allowed to, of course, you're allowed to, but you increase your chances of not getting published. If you increase your chances of not getting published, and you're at a university that counts publications as an indicator of your success, well, look, you know what's going to happen. You're going to try to force all of your publications in here because that's the fastest way to get them out. I had to do that because a lot of what I'm going to be saying, at least, let me not put words in Pei's mouth, but at least a lot of what I'm going to be telling you seems to be of the indication that, well, everyone is off in La La Land. And, maybe so. But I like the way that Pei phrased it. Don't take my word for it. Take this summer course and make up your own mind. So we already did this. Now let's delve in a bit deeper. Intelligence exists because time is scarce and energy is scarce. It's the only reason it exists. Plus this. That is, since nature figured out ways of having matter organized in ways in which you can increase the survival probability of individuals and hence species by implanting them with something we call a brain. Then that brain implements something we also call intelligence sometimes. And the only reason is that time and energy is scarce on this planet. So there are threats to the survival of what we call living things that have to do with time, say a tree falling on you, or the flood coming in, and energy. You're just tired and hungry, and you're going to run out of energy to search for food at some point. So that's actually an example of time and energy together.
But then if a tree will falling down on a subject, then it will be the last thing that he will do is thinking. He will be running. So there are different type of intelligence should be, because it should learn to run.
Yeah.
But not to think, in this case.
Yeah, that's a good question. So is the detection of a tree falling on you or something else like a car coming towards you that's threatening your livelihood, is that thinking? And also, does running away require thinking? I mean, those are the two questions here. Those are good questions. I guess my short answer is I use an inclusive definition of intelligence. That is, when I say intelligence in my own work, what I mean is much more inclusive than the standard use of the term. So there's two ways to do this. One is to say, well, like I was saying with the back rear view mirror, AI actually defines in AI its own field. It's very much defined in terms of what's already been done in the field. And on the outer periphery, you could say that's the union of all the things that if you talk to 1 million people, they would include as intelligent. Okay? So that's how I use the term. So I wouldn't really want to quarrel with anyone whether identifying an oncoming car as thinking or not. I don't really want to get into that discussion because then we're actually talking about how to define the term thinking. And I think that's besides the point, because if you think about the being that did that in nature, now the being that essentially avoids the falling tree, either got that in their DNA, in which case nature hardwired it in somehow.
I just want to talk.
Or
can your definition of intelligence can be like everything that have been learned?
Right. So yeah, so either they got it in their DNA or they learned it on their own accord, either by teaching or by observing or by having a small tree hit them and not dying and remembering that it hurt. So here's a big one. Oh, it's going to hurt. Well, no, it's going to kill you, but you might as well just run. And so, yeah, I think as soon as you have that situation, obviously, it's very hard to say that it's not thinking. It's easy when you slice out just that case when you're standing on the curb and you got hit by a car and it's like, what were you thinking? Oh, I wasn't thinking. Yeah, okay. But, now we're just doing cartoons. So, and that's one of my points actually, and I'll come back to that word later, cartoon. But let me see how time is coming here. Okay, yeah, we're good. So, why is intelligence necessarily tied to time? Well, it's because all of our behavior, and let's just use humans for now. It's, as I said, it's the easiest thing. All of our behavior is at some point in time impacted somehow by time, either time constraints, deadlines, or windows during which something needs to happen for something else to follow. Now, the weird thing is, that's another word you don't see in the mainstream AI literature much, time. But I would say, and maybe it was Pei who pointed this out to me, I think so actually, that if you either ignore time or computational resources, if essentially these are infinite, or you say they don't matter to my definition of intelligence, well then intelligence is irrelevant to some extent, because then you could just enumerate everything, you have all the time in the world, and just figure out the best thing to do. So intelligence is for the real world. That's really, why does it jump? No natural intelligence in known existence is without a sense, decide, act architecture. That is, you sense stuff, it gets processed somehow, and you do something. Now sometimes, if you make plans, it's the other way around. You act, you observe what happened, you make sure that it's what you wanted, and you go on. When I use that sense, decide, act, I really have to emphasize here that I'm not talking about a single loop. Where's the eraser? Oh, here it is. I think I can take this out. I'm not talking about just a single loop like this that's lockstep. And what's the frame rate, you may ask. Oh, no. That is not what I have in mind here. This is old school. What we really have is more like an onion. with some loops taking longer than others, and there's a lot of multiple loops going on at the same time at all times, even when we're sleeping. Now, and here's where we start to get into the systems view. So, in a system like this, of course, you have processes with various dependencies and interaction frequencies and styles, and which we call couplings. So if your hearing and vision is coupled together somehow via attention, you may hear a strange noise behind you. You will turn your vision sensors in the direction of the predicted direction from which the sound came. And so there is a coupling to some extent. Psychologists call this the orientation or orienting response. I'll guarantee you, if you walk up to a colleague without them hearing your footsteps and you go boo in their ear, they'll go like this. It's just unavoidable. It's hardwired almost. But it's a choice reaction. It's not a reflex, because a reflex only goes through the spine. The choice reaction is essentially, well, you've got some information. It's new information. It's the direction of the sound. And then you turn. So you wouldn't turn this way if the sound was coming from here. So it's a choice. You're making your brain, I'll put it this way, because it doesn't feel to us like we're making a choice. Here's where words trip us up, really, and the prior use of words. But it's almost, it feels to us like a reflex, but it isn't a reflex biologically speaking. So anyway, you've got these couplings between processes. They're all interdependent. You've got them all hooked up somehow, and they're all influencing each other in various ways. Now, you can look at the various ways in which these connections can be made, and you can see that even for a small set of processes, you can have a large variety of connection types, strengths, etc. And if you look at the brain, if you see that the number of neurons estimated in the human brain, you've got the smallest units down here. The neurons themselves are connected to each other, but they create circuits, and then they have that's why we have regions in the brain that seem to be managing certain parts of our behavior and experience, and others doing other stuff. That's why it matters if you get if a vein bursts in your brain. It matters where it bursts, because it may change your life forever, or no one may ever know. And so you've got these systems. At the top you have the brain with, I guess, the kind of introspectively obvious faculties like attention and language and stuff. So yeah, we're almost coming to the break now. It's good. And it looks to me, based on the speed here, that we'll finish somewhat before 4, maybe 3:30 or 4-ish. I don't know. We'll see. So now I haven't talked too much about goals. I will talk about that. I'll make a mental note of making sure I talk about goals. But I've talked a bit about perception, attention, not too much the other stuff. Prediction, yes. So anyway, you've got all this stuff in your brain, and you want it to interact coherently. You don't want your goal of not being hit by a car getting confused with the goal of eating vanilla pudding. It just, it would be a disaster probably. You would run away from the vanilla pudding or do something very strange. And so you definitely don't want to get all this mixed up. You want it to be coherently connected and interacting.
Can I disagree with that statement, just for the sake of the
Sure. Yeah.
And I could turn away from the car, away from the ice cream parlor,
Yeah.
or I could turn away from the car towards the ice cream parlor. Then I could.
Yeah. Excellent point. So basically, conflicting goals
I mean, they don't
and
have
priorities.
Yeah, priorities.
Yes.
They don't have to be conflicting goals. That's what
Well, if you have seemingly conflicting goals, there are sometimes ways to make them not conflict and achieve them both. And that's why you need a brain. Okay?
A car with ice cream.
Sorry?
A car with ice
An ice cream getting hit by the ice cream truck. Yeah, that would be a disaster. Unless it was just, not so serious, and you could just, limp to the guy and buy it. I don't know. So what I'm trying to get at here is that the prime example of an intelligent system, the human mind, has a lot of stuff in it, and it's really well connected, or at least decently connected. And if we want to understand that, now let's just imagine that we're cognitive scientists, and what we're really interested in is understanding how the human mind works. It's pretty clear that if we only model a very tiny part of it, we may miss out on large, important sections that are connected in somehow and maybe modulate the function of the whole thing that we're trying to study. And a corollary to this is the financial system, and not so long ago, a financial crash that affected Iceland and the US and parts of Europe as well. One of the reasons that it happened, and I happen to have fairly good evidence for this claim, is that we don't understand the financial system well enough. There exists no computer model of the financial system, even just the banking part of the financial system, that completely describes it as it is implemented in reality. What you have is computer models, yes, but they're partial and they're based on theories. So they don't model the actual thing. And as you've seen with the financial crisis, very few people saw it coming. That's a hint already that we have very bad ideas about how the system works. Now, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of economists here in our field. So we need comprehensive models. This is one of the things that computer science makes us really appreciate, that we need to, for any complex system, there can be very nonlinear parts of it that behave badly, or that are hard to understand, or that are highly sensitive, however you want to look at it. And so we need to understand, we need to model the whole thing. We can't get away from that. So, complex system architecture. This is unavoidable. If anyone says, I have the golden screw for achieving AGI or AI or whatever it is in our field, don't believe it. In hindsight, sometimes you can point out, oh, that was the single most important thing that was required for us to achieve manned spaceflight or whatever it is. Rocket fuel was like the key, the golden screw for getting people into outer space. Yeah, and a bunch of other stuff, but sometimes sometimes actually people forget in hindsight that there were so many other things that we didn't know how to put together, and then someone came along and put them all together. Oh yeah, and then there was this invention of the fuel that got put in. Maybe it was like a really famous inventor that invented that, so it gets remembered. Anyway, I don't really think there is any reason, not in biology and not in AI, to think that somehow there's this tiny little golden algorithm that explains it all. So we have no choice but to come to this conclusion, frankly. And that's where we take a break. Before we take a break, let's see, are there any questions? Yes.
Are the slides going to be put online?
Wasn't planning on it, but I could be, if you twist my arm, maybe. Oh, okay.
Very quick.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I was reading your definition of intelligence, but my definition of intelligence is an expression of natural creativity. So for me, intelligence is something very slightly different, and many more other things that I want to say.
Yeah. My definition of creativity is it requires intelligence. No, all jokes aside, that's a very good point that intelligence is what? Creative? Applied creativity? No.
When I looked at your definition of intelligence, I understood it and I thought it was okay, but after a while I realized that it is subjective. So for example, when the tree falls under the falls, you're looking at the intelligence of the individual, whether it should move or not. But in my view, or one of the views that I'm learning to explore, the individual and the tree is also intelligent in some way. And it's falling because of something. So basically, I consider myself not an individual separated from the tree in some way. So I'm thinking, and I cannot explain it any better, so I don't. But for example, it says that in India, when you walk under the coconut tree and the coconut falls on your head, it says that it's because you made it fall. It's your fault. It's something that you must have done which was wrong.
Yeah.
So in a way, I look at the person who was under the tree and the tree as a single intelligent entity. So my secondary thought following that was, so maybe intelligence is an expression of natural creativity.
Natural creativity,
So
an
this is
expression
just
of
a
natural
suggestion.
creativity.
We can talk about this.
Well, yeah, so since you brought creativity to the table, I don't have a lot on creativity in my slides, but one of the reasons that I don't talk too much about creativity is not because I don't like it, it's not because I don't think it belongs here, but rather that I don't think you can be intelligent without being creative. And my opinion is that, that intelligence requires creativity in a pretty much continuous increase as you go up the animal species sort of from let's just say most people would agree are very dumb animals to the human being, which everyone seems to agree on can be sometimes intelligent. Okay. So anyway, this spectrum, but there's probably different types of creativity, and I'm not going to go into that at all.
I didn't understand. It's not. I am adding this definition to yours as a possible alternative way of looking at it.
So I'll leave you with this thought then. My definition. So my view of creativity is essentially that. Let's see. The best way to define creativity is in view of a problem. Yes, we do use the word in various ways in culture. And of course, many people say that artists, they're creative. The rest of us are just not that creative at all. And strangely enough, people ignore the fact that in order to come up with good scientific theories, you really have to be creative. It's a given. But doesn't get too much talked about. When people think Einstein, they think, oh, mathematical genius. They don't think creative genius, which is very strange to me. I mean, it could be, easily for me, it could be completely the opposite. The emphasis could be on the other side, the creativity side. But the best way for me to think about creativity is that you have a problem, and you bring some entities to the problem, or you bring this problem to them, and you ask them to solve it. What matters here is that the complexity of the problem, the speed of the solution, and the flexibility of changing the solution in various ways based on new constraints that may come along. This is all part of the definition of creativity. Anyone who gets a higher score on these will be, in my view, deemed more creative. But most people would probably say, oh, but no, they're more intelligent, they're not more creative. And I have a hard time separating them, frankly.
Yeah, we can do it some other time, discuss it some other time. Thank you for a great talk.
So I guess you're just aching to get off those chairs. Let's meet back here in, say, 15 minutes. So 20, what's the time now? 12. 25 minutes past. Okay? So, intelligence requires a complex system. I guess that's where we're at here in the story. So, now we need to ask ourselves, how does computer science solve the construction of giant complex systems? In fact, we can also ask, what methodology does science propose for the study of giant complex systems? Unfortunately, the literature on how to construct giant complex systems is not vast. And some people's definition of giant complex systems do not include the kinds of systems that a human body is or a human brain is, which is way beyond most modeling capabilities of any scientific method known to man and woman. The standard technique in science that's worked for millennia is divide and conquer. You look at the problem, if it's too big for your current methods, you divide it up into smaller sub-problems, each of which individually is maybe simpler and easier to address than the whole thing at once. If you look at the history of science, there's really no contender that seems better than this approach. And it really is the main principle behind all software development. And of course, this is where object-oriented programming came from. And in fact, it's so common and so familiar to us that we maybe even don't notice. So in computer science, this has been applied by the standard way. You modularize your system. Of course, you start by listing the requirements, then and sketching an outline of a solution, of a design. And then you implement the modules by hand, which is, of course, how we write code. You connect these modules together and you run the thing. If you make a pseudo code for this, the algorithm looks something like this. Modularize includes subdividing the system, figuring out the module function, implementing the module. Does the module work? No, let's go back to modularization. Maybe we need to go back to 1, or maybe we need to go back to 1C, depending on what may be the case. Then you combine the modules. You ask yourself, is the architecture complete? If no, you continue, and so on. And the architecture is eventually complete. So it's a tried and tested method. It's the scientific method, really. It's a piecewise implementation. It's what we've been doing. It's what all the fields do, in fact. It's why scientific fields exist in the first place. Divide and conquer. Okay, we want to understand the universe. We divide it into fields, and the fields into schools, and the schools into faculties, or whatever, how you use the terms, and so on. And we construct things manually. We write articles about subparts of the thing we've made. In computer science, we implement things sometimes, or at least sketch a very believable mathematical solution to it. And if it's mathematicizable enough, we can maybe get away with that, or logical enough. But most of the time in computer science, we also want to implement things and collect some data on how the thing performs. And we end up with grossly modular system construction. That is, the modules are pretty big. And that's because there aren't that many of them for any system. Even network systems, which are fairly extensive, cover the whole globe, frankly, and they include various types of routers and cables and protocols and software at each end, etc. There's not many types of modules there. Yes, there's a lot of instances of modules, but there's not a lot of types. And pretty much they function the way they're supposed to, or else you really can't get online. So that's it. So this is construction by hand, the ultimate method. This is what science has taught us. This is why people are afraid. We all know what kinds of systems can be built using this way. I call this constructionist AI because the programmer is the construction worker. And I want to show you a picture of a modern day Frankenstein monster. This is the real Frankenstein monster. This is Asimov, one of the world's most advanced humanoid robots. I think that's even a slogan they use. Don't get me wrong, I'm impressed with Asimov. It's a fine piece of machinery. This is a video, these are snapshots from a video from 2005 or something like that, where Asimov is seen walking out of a subway station in New York. It's actually on the corner, quite close to where I used to live, but I wasn't there on that day, unfortunately. The funny thing is, they had them walk there with people in the street. I don't think these are stand-ins, or I don't think they're paid to walk there. They seem very sort of typical New Yorkers, but none of them actually pays any attention to Asimov. And there's this one girl, she's about maybe 9 or 10. It's the one person, that little girl that turns around when she sees Asimov walking there. It's like, what is that? You can see she's tuned to the future. The other guys are just, I don't know, money-making machines or whatever they are. It's really a fascinating video. I found it online. It disappeared. I haven't found it again, but it's a really cool thing. It's one of the few sort of demos of technology like this where I went like, oh wow, the future's here. And then you start to look into what is inside of this Frankenstein monster. And I know it firsthand because I worked with these guys for a while, the US branch in California, on making the software for teaching Asimov to play card games with kids. And it turns out that basically what they do is they make one of these demos per year or so, 1 or 2 per year. And the coolest ones they put online as advertisements for Honda Motors. But they're all very isolated demos. The software that is involved that controls the robots cannot be used for anything else. Firstly, because it's not really documented. Secondly, because it's not really properly implemented. Thirdly, frankly, because it doesn't scale, actually. These are single, isolated perfect examples of what I was trying to tell you before about the divide and conquer method. And yes, Honda made significant progress. In 2005, this is what they said, Asimo slated to become a household helper by 2012. That was last year. Oh, it's got all of these things. Okay. So, AGI. We'll use the same method. We'll implement by hand using divide and conquer, okay? Yeah, this is what the standard methodology in AI teaches us because it's all inherited from computer science. Constructionist design methodologies of various kinds. Now remember, AGI, and look, this is what we were looking at just in terms of not even including learning, just knowing what and knowing how to. And we're supposed to do all this by hand. And that's just a tiny part of the pie. It just seems very implausible. But yet you will hear arguments, modular construction is tried and tested. It's a sure way to create complex architectures while minimizing skilled requirements for skilled human labor. And you can just put things together like Lego bricks later. That would be true if they had invented the stud. But I don't know of anyone who's actually invented the stud for AI like the inventor of the Lego brick did in the 50s. So there's an assumption, essentially inherent, in virtually all of AI research to date that the divide and conquer has worked so far for science, so we'll work on the pieces, and then ultimately we'll just put them together like Lego bricks. And if we need the system to do something automatically, we'll do it as people are doing today. You have little tuning programs on top of some knobs and dials that are predefined that the system can itself tune to calibrate things, to fine-tune to whatever is the case, that the task that the system has to be doing. This is really wrong. I don't put red X's on my slides very often. This is one of those times. Because just very sort of simple back-of-the-envelope analysis shows you how incredibly far out this idea is that you can get advanced learning of multiple tasks in multiple domains, adapting to complex environments, and have cognitive growth, and I'll get more into that later, is well beyond the scope of traditional software methodologies. And then, of course, is the next question. What's the alternative? I don't have the full answer, but I do have parts, or what I believe are parts of the answer. And we call this constructivist methodology, which essentially relegates a lot of the building of the cognitive architecture to the architecture itself. I used to not think this was feasible, just in the same way that I can see how the modular constructionist way is a very slow and difficult way, if not impossible to do. But since I have discovered some ways of possibly achieving this, and they map very nicely onto some of Pei Wang's ideas as well, I am more convinced now than ever that this is the way to go. For now. So I will delve a bit more into constructivist methodology tomorrow, but let me just go on record with a few of the main motivations for why I think we need different new methodologies. It's because if you use divide and conquer and you divide things up, yes, you may be able to achieve parts that seem to make sense in isolation. But very few people actually talk about putting things together, and this is hardly ever discussed. And in fact, just a handful of people, like Edward O. Wilson at Harvard University, have made a career out of talking about how to put things back together once you figure them out in isolation. He wrote a very good book called Consilience, and there are other books like that. It's getting increasingly to be recognized as a problem. But the thing is, it's just really seems an insurmountable problem that all the fields have gone their separate ways, and the trend seems to be that all the fields are, or even within fields like computer science, the trend is to develop new concepts that may or may not overlap slightly or somewhat or completely with other terms used for the same thing in another group, but the groups don't talk even if they're doing the same, virtually the same thing, because they use different terms. Why do they use different terms? It's because of this. Because if you use different terms but are still within the sort of obvious bounds of what would be the next thing to do here for any state-of-the-art in any field, then if you invent new terms, it makes you capable of talking to a smaller group of people. And if you have a smaller group of people, the threshold for getting published is lower. So the whole force here is towards people making small groups like AGI, in fact. And this is a real problem. Now, of course, we would like more people to come to AGI, and we believe that we're not doing this so as to get published more easily. In fact, if anything, we're like parapsychologists. We need to have higher standards than everyone else, because otherwise they'll just say we're full of baloney. So, given that computer simulations are an integral part of AGI research, as they are becoming increasingly important in various fields, then a key determinant of speed of progress is how such systems, simulation models, are developed and implemented. Why are we implementing them? Well, to run them. Why are we running them? Well, to get data. Well, why do we need data? Because we want to compare to reality to see how well they map on and describe and predict reality. So, the methodology used to design, write, and implement these simulations, of course, is a key determinant of the rate of progress. Another motivation I've already gone through is that differences in type and scope and underlying assumptions of the smaller type theories are very likely to prevent them from ever being combined. Even the most willing community of researchers has a hard time. I don't know if you've ever worked in a software development team. If you have, especially if you have worked in a software development team that's bigger than six people and needs to build a piece of the pie of some software program, especially if some of the other teams are located in different countries and you don't see them hardly ever, or just in email and Skype, then you know how hard it is to even develop simple software systems that already have a predefined running environment and a very clear utilitarian scope or goal. For those of you who haven't, I'll just say, it's really difficult. And as an example, why did it take Microsoft 10 years to do a proper copy-paste buffer in their operating system. That's just beyond my understanding anyway, but it shows you that even with a very clear goal, if you have a large team and a complex task, it's very hard to do things that can get integrated easily and functions well together. So why should we think that the scientific enterprise of doing AGI or AI would have any hope where you're not only doing that software part that seems to be such a problem for even people doing much simpler things for money-making purposes, where we have to essentially not just do that layer, but multiple layers below that or above, if you think that other way, which include the philosophical underpinnings, the analysis, the level of analysis of the system, the division of the system, the assumptions about the operational assumptions, the assumptions about how things will be integrated in the future, as well as how they work, etc. It's just enormous. So I think now I'm ready to tell you, if you haven't figured out already, why there's a G in AGI. The reason is that some people, including some people, which include myself, felt that the current way that AI was going had very little hope of succeeding. I think of it this way, at some point in the past 10 years, I realized, at this pace, with this approach, there's not a chance in hell that AGI will be realized, or any inkling of AGI will be realized within my lifetime. So I thought, are there ways to speed this up? That was my motivation there. And I had already my path came partly from cognitive science, and I already had thought a lot about integration of complex systems, and question that we got from Jordi earlier about how to connect the parts, connect the dots. Is anyone thinking about the glue? Well, it turns out it's not really an appropriate metaphor. I used to use it a lot. We need to invent superglue. Nobody is trying to invent superglue. It's not really an appropriate metaphor because it's more like, I think of it more like this. It's not that we're gluing stuff together. It's more like we need to invent living tissue. And it's so different from the sand that we're pouring in to make skyscrapers that it's just a different category. And that's really why G was put in there, was needed. And I haven't looked recently, but I'd be curious to see what the status of this trend is in the larger scientific community of AI and computer science. But interestingly enough, there's historically thoughts about intelligence and computation go fairly far back to Kant and Wittgenstein and Turing. The cyberneticists, of course, were already thinking about these things. And in fact, the psychologists were too, but they didn't have this. They were, in fact, and still are fairly pre-computational in their thinking. But Turing essentially, one of the reasons he's a monumental figure in the history is that he managed to propose a model for computation and explain the phenomenon of computation very well to his peers. And he also was the first to tie that to thoughts about what is intelligence and how would we recognize if a machine was intelligent. And in fact, propose a kind of a believable, even though it was maybe marginally believable at the time, model for how to make machines intelligent. So I wasn't planning on talking too much about the Turing test. I could if you want me to, but
No, can I say something?
yeah.
I was gonna, now you're giving me a lot of inputs for things that I would be interested in maybe writing about. And, but something that was bugging me when you started today is like, when I approached AGI, it wasn't clear to me, a lot of things weren't clear to me, and they're still not clear to me. And now I realize that they're still not clear. AGI has not worked out quite a few things yet, which we consider a good thing, which means at least they're looking ahead and they're gonna be worked out eventually, right? But something fundamental that I wonder is, do we want to build machines which are human-like? I mean, there are some fundamental questions, I think. For example, to build a robot that can ski can be technically and scientifically very challenging, therefore interesting. But I don't think it's useful. I mean, in the sense that why would we want to put all that energy to build a robot that can ski when we still have children in the world who would like to learn how to ski, for some reason they don't have the means. So somehow I see that it could help to scope AGI further to identify those areas where we do need intelligent machines without wasting our time doing very creative, very challenging things which are not that useful or not working within the priority areas of humanity. See what I mean? Does it make sense?
Let me see if I can take that up and reply, and then you'll tell me if it's on your path or not. One of the ways that I think we could answer that line of, or continue with that line of thought is from the question of what use is AGI? Let's say we had AGI. What use is it? What should we, if we had a choice of making an AGI more human-like or more this-like or that-like, and all of them will take time and we can't do them all, and we had to pick one, would we still want to aim for human-like? Or would we want to invent an AGI that, say, could solve the world famine problem? Which would be, to me, a worthy system to have. Because it doesn't seem like humans can.
It's roughly in that direction, but I would take that reasoning further.
Okay.
We wouldn't have the world famine problem if we administer our resources differently. So even that wouldn't be a problem per se. So however,
Yeah.
that is in that direction. What are we going for?
Yeah,
what
so
is the humanity goal and how can AGI serve it?
of course, as I said in the beginning, there are two sides to AI and AGI. There's the more practical, applied side, and there's the curiosity side. We just want to know. We want to understand. We don't know what we uncover in our search for understanding this phenomenon, intelligence, in what ways that could be useful in the future. So it's typically not a good idea in my mind to preclude some paths of scientific investigation because we're afraid it will be misused. Because typically there are ways to misuse things and there are ways to use them cleverly and well for the benefit of humankind. Of course, philosophers have been driving down this road for many, many centuries as to how to weigh the valuation of, say, human life or suffering or etc. It's not something I've spent too much time thinking about, so I can't really tell you too much about it. I do have a feeling that if we go the breadth first way, as I think of it, as AGI breadth first. We try to include everything, or have a much more inclusive view of what kind of a system we want to build than the standard AI people would, let's make a self-driving car. Well, it's certainly not going to play chess. It's not even going to learn to play chess. It's not going to be capable of that because you already start with the utility in mind. So I want to have a better way of washing windows, so I make a window cleaning robot. I don't need AGI for that, probably. Probably if you had enough money and you saw enough profit in it, today a company could be started that made robots that clean windows on skyscrapers at much cheaper rate and lower risk of human injury than current solutions offer. And a lot of problems in society are like that. But it's when you get to the creative problems, like how could you reorganize government to implement better the things that everyone agrees on should be done better, But there's a lot of these meta problems, and of course these systems will always be under the control of natural intelligences, that is us, or some of us, and we'll still have the problem of some small groups of people trying to prevent things from happening because they like it as it is, because it's not in their interest to change it, which I think is, in at least Western societies, is one of the problems that we have to deal with, essentially. Everyone agrees that we need better, communication, let's say, between the ministries or whatever, but nobody seems to be able to figure out how to implement better communication, even though we have all the technology in the world to do communication. So there's a lot of interesting, when you get into that range of questions, how to solve world famine, how to invent better governments, how to overturn a government in, say, 100 years. Well, that's an interesting question. I think it'd be hard to implement that.
Consider that as a suggestion, which eventually maybe I'm going to write it out. Could it help the AGI research community make more progress if it defined some of the, what is it trying to achieve, a little slightly more narrowly, to help us drive this enormous field, which is, I think, very important, but difficult to grasp in some way.
So you're asking, would it be maybe useful for the AGI community to define its task more narrowly? And my immediate answer to that is no, because that is the primary problem driver in the AI community, in fact. And as soon as you start to accept that, you get into trouble. So it's like saying, well, to the biologist, okay, yes, you're trying to understand metabolism in general, independent of, independent of the species, let's say. So someone comes along and says, why don't you focus more on humans? And there are various reasons for why that might be a bad idea. Now, I see Pei waving, so let me...
Yeah, I want to add, maybe because you missed part of my lecture in the morning, that's the issue I actually addressed. Currently, AGI, there are people who try to define AGI by the type of problem it can solve, but that's only one approach. Many other people try, for example, in my own work, I don't really define AGI by what problem it can solve, but by how it solves it. So because of that, it's actually independent to where you apply. But the other issue, we can still discuss that, but it's from a different angle.
And it's not just how, you don't define your system just by how it solves it, but also by the...
How, I mean under what constraints?
exactly, with the conditions or assumptions about the situation, in fact,
Yeah.
that it can or is supposed to be able to handle.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing, and I think that's a very important view that I'm very hard pressed to take out of AGI. I think, yes, as Pei says, some part of the AGI community could probably explore that and come up with something interesting there. But I think it's dangerous to the very idea of AGI if you say, okay, well, let's all do that now.
Exactly.
So I turn it around, and that's why I always talk about humans. So, because it's much easier for me at least, to think about what AGI is about when I think about the natural phenomenon that it's trying to study. Okay? Now that sounds like cognitive psychology, but why? So why isn't it? Well, primarily by the methods of investigation used and by the primary emphasis on developing runnable models. So, and you could eject maybe another one, which is that you want practical results. Because a cognitive psychologist is not interested necessarily in implementing a program that describes or that manifests their theory, even though a lot of them do that because it's very hard to not do it. But they're not as hard pressed as AI people. I mean, an AI theorist without a program that runs is a fairly rare occurrence and a strange phenomenon. Although it turns out actually, if you look at a lot of the papers, most of the claims are only partially implemented oftentimes. But that's a different problem. So yeah.
Several slides back, you referred to computer simulations, and I understand the importance of the simulations, but I wasn't sure how they fit into the thread of the slides before and after. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah. So, of course, simulation is a very stretchable term. Depending on how you look at it, you could any AI system could essentially be said to implement be an instance of a class or family of theories of cognition. Especially if it's starting to do something like adapt to new environments or learn new things that the designers did not think of beforehand. There is this phenomenon called the AI effect. I don't know who has heard of the AI effect? It's typically put in quotes. 2, okay. So, ever since I started reading about AI, I've come across this in various forms. AI people complaining that whenever they solve an AI problem and they have the AI system running, then someone comes along and points at the thing and says, that's just computer science. Why is it AI? Why is it intelligent? What's so intelligent about it? Why is it cognition? And so on and so on. And they always feel, they feel bad and they're pretty angry about this. And so someone suggested, excuse me for not knowing the history well enough here, but someone suggested that this was in fact a natural part of AI. That as soon as AI explained something or did a system that already, like a chess playing program, they had revealed something about intelligence, and since people now can see how it works, they don't feel that it's intelligent anymore because it has visibly causal chains, and it's obviously deterministic, even though it may have a random number generator somewhere. Doesn't matter. So they said, okay, yeah, so this is actually part of the natural progression of AI. Ultimately, we'll be sitting down and say, I'm intelligent, and someone will come along and say, oh no, this is just a program running. You're just running a brain algorithm, and you can look it up here. Here's an example of how your brain works. I mean, it may not be exactly how your individual brain works because we haven't mapped out your past history, but it's of a family of this kind. And so I have a very different explanation of that. I think Pei actually alluded to this earlier, which is that the AI effect exists because all AI progress to date has been narrow AI progress by and large. And when you slice a task that requires an intelligent agent, let's say you slice a task of some sort, that was not intentionally in that part, okay. It's a box. You take out this slice of the whole green blackboard here, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to implement this. I'm going to figure out how to write an algorithm. I'm an AI researcher, so obviously what I produce is AI. It's by definition, etc. And when you take these slices out, you're taking out so much of that list that I showed you before that a man off the street, you bring in your brother or your grandfather or whoever, and you show them this thing and you ask them, like, look, it's intelligent. And they go, why would you say that? And they'll be thinking of all the things that people can do and even their dog can do that this thing doesn't do. And so why is it that this tiny little slice of that obviously is also deterministically algorithmic, why is it you call it intelligent? Well, my theory is that once we reach some threshold of AGI, this AI effect will go away. And people will start to ask much more interesting questions and come up with more interesting comments. Like, oh, but does it do this? Because in the morning when I brush my teeth, I always check the news. And so does it have an urge to check the news? I mean, those are the kinds of things. I'm not saying that as a specific example, but as a class of questions that is very different from, why do you call this intelligent? It's very different. It's like, you'll start to hear much more interesting questions, and they'll be in some way closer to home. They'll be more about psychology and less about machines. And that is an effect that I don't think will go away. That's a very different kind of AI effect, and it's much more interesting. So I think the AI effect, so-called, is an artifact of the field just doing its task wrong, doing its job wrong. So anyway, I think I should move on. I wanted at last to give you a list of requirements that I, myself, and my collaborators are working under the assumption of achieving, or goal of achieving. So this is just the list. I'll go through these in detail, each one. So we want our system that we target, the system that we intend to build, the AGI aspiring system, to be able to achieve multiple goals. And we want it to work in the following way. Initial goals are defined by the programmers. This is a small number of goals, relatively speaking, compared to what we want the machine to ultimately do. They're meant for bootstrapping the system. To give you an analogy, to put that in the right perspective, a newborn baby flails its arms about for a while, and then it figures out, oh, I can put my thumb in my mouth. It's called motor babbling. They also babble a lot, and that goes out of their mouth and into their ears. And if you, like a friend of mine, had a child that had the ears blocked partly, it delays the onset of language skills significantly. if they don't hear what others are saying and or themselves are saying. So this is essentially the idea, some initial goals, but then the system builds its own goals from that. It may be according to some guidelines for how the system should evolve, but it's autonomous in that you don't halt the clock, fix some code, and then press run, but rather the system's always on. And also, the system has to be able to handle cases that we discussed earlier, where you have multiple goals. They may be conflicting, or there may be multiple goals that interfere or interact in some way, and we want the system to manage that autonomously. We also work under the assumption of resource limitations, because we want the system to run in realistic conditions, and when we say realistic, we mean not engineered environments. Or I should say, partly engineered environments, like this office. Now, if I put a standard factory worker robot in here, it would probably kill some of us and mess up some of the tables, and because these robots are meant to work in conditions that have been highly engineered and designed specifically for it to be able to do its task. We want to address the semi-randomness of reality in our AGI systems, because this really is what intelligence is for in the first place, so it really should be part of it. And this means, as Pei also already mentioned this morning, that the system has to be aware of how it uses its own resources, because it is limited, so it has to plan and use it in clever ways. We're also assuming knowledge limitations. That is, I don't know everything there is to know. You don't know everything there is to know. Not even collectively do we know a whole lot when it comes to the whole, in view of the whole universe. I mean, frankly, as much as scientists like to boast about their field's advancements and so on, we really don't know much about anything. And this seems to be a standard feature of intelligence. So if we are the highest level, well, it's pretty lame, actually. In the big picture, doesn't mean we can't figure out how to build AGIs, though. And we don't assume that the environment is given a priori. The system should figure it out. And the information that the system starts out with should not have to be complete. How does the kind of a system work? Well, this is really a key thing. Autonomous knowledge extraction. Either or both, in fact, both. The system learns from what happens around it. Even if it's not directed or directly intended as such by the system or anyone else. It just learns by being. And also, the system, as it grows in its knowledge, strategically searches out knowledge that increases its knowledge. So, an example of this could be that, what's a good example? A semi-blind robot roaming the hallways here, fumbling about with its sonar sensors, may not sense more than a few meters ahead of itself and to the sides. It sees that, okay, I've got a wall here. Oh, here's a doorway. All right. I wonder what's on the other side of this hallway. And next time it drives through, it actually decides to stay a little bit closer to that side in order to answer the question, how wide is this hallway? Now, I haven't really studied the psychological literature long and hard enough to tell you whether people have done experiments on this, but I'll bet you that you will see in unintentional and intentional things that people do that actually increase our knowledge automatically, even if we don't think about it. Now, of course, we do this when we see something strange, like, oh, I haven't seen this before, I wonder how hard the material is. I will do an experiment. I'll press on it. I won't break anymore. But I think I've done enough damage. But you see my point. I mean, when visual illusions or reflections, that's something that fascinated me when I was a kid and sometimes still does. I see a weird visual effect caused by some mirrors or glass, and I move my head sort of curiously. This is probably where curiosity comes from, in fact, because you don't know if picking this up is going to answer your question on how fragile it is. It may not actually break, and you may not be tempted to try to break it. But you still, nevertheless, curiously pick this thing up, move it around a bit. You fiddle with things. I mean, this is, and who does this more than anyone on the planet? Children. They do this all the time. They're always fiddling with stuff. What the hell are they doing? Why are they pouring the water like all the time? It's for hours on end. Why is it fascinating to them? Why isn't it fascinating to us? Why don't I still go to the sink and do this all the time now? Well, I guess my theory is that it's already, the answer has been provided to my pre-programmed brain. This is one of the goals that I got in my genes, that basically I should do this until my brain feels like I'm good enough at predicting how these things behave. So anyway, that was my little detour on that point. Dynamic open-ended environments. We don't know if our robot is going to Mars or the Amazon. That's my heuristic for remembering what that thing is. I am the engineer. I am making this AGI robot. The guys at NASA haven't told me where they're going to send it. Is it going to be the Amazon or the deep ocean or Mars? So, mind you, I'm making the mind, and so the manipulator modules will be added later. But yeah, so this is the point. It's open-ended. There's no way that I will know everything about this room ever, even if I spend my whole life here studying it. I couldn't even memorize the various surface details of even part of this wall, even if I spent 40 years on it. So there's always details you will not study and remember or know about or understand. There's always something. So you just have to assume that these systems will never know everything. Unified multimodality, what is that? Well, an AGI, if it's general enough, if we have done our job, it should not matter too much what kind of modality it gets its knowledge in via the sensors via which it gets its knowledge. It shouldn't matter too much. Whether it's a color camera or a black and white camera array or a Kinect sensor or touch and smell or whatever, or a combination of all of these. The system should not continue reciting the poem in the woods when the tree is falling. It should not finish the vanilla pudding then as the tree is coming down. It should understand how to order its or prioritize its goals and classify in real time the various threats and effects that the various events in the non-axiomatized environment that the environment is presenting to it. So, and this has to be at runtime. It cannot be like, oh, I'm going to take some downtime and figure out if I have any threats. This is what NASA does with the Mars rover. They just stop it. They have it drive like 5 meters to 15 meters. And then they take a week to ponder the next 5 to 15 meters. Oh, that's actually done by humans. Then they send the plan up. And there's very little that the robot does, actually. It's fairly dumb. Robustness. If the system can achieve consistently and repeatably a set of goals with some constraints, like, let's say, juggle 3 balls, silly example, I can't, or write that letter and put it in the envelope and put it in the mail. It should continue to do so even if some new stuff happens in the environment as far as that change in the environment isn't significant or has huge impact on the particulars of that task. That is, it should be robust. There are various ways to define robustness. This is just one of them. Scalability, at least 2 ways of scalability. The complexity of the environment should not affect it too much, if at all. The complexity of the knowledge it has accumulated should not affect it either negatively or positively too much at all, except, well, if we could figure out a way that the more knowledge it has, the more scalable it is, that would be nice. But at least it shouldn't go in the negative. And the performance could be defined as the number and complexity of goals that it can achieve, moderated by their importance. And of course, included in that is goals about its own resource management, etc. Generality, the systems model, the architecture, should be applicable to any domain. It should be domain independent. Okay? We have a couple of footnotes here. We're not really interested in hard real-time systems. Natural intelligences that are hard real-time in the engineering sense do not exist. So these are not included, just to make sure that nobody interprets it the wrong way. And we don't guarantee anything about optimality. So that's the summary. That's those things. That's, I guess, a complete list, as you'll get, of the requirements. This is the challenge. How do we build a system that can learn things and then do things, meeting all of these goals? How can we achieve AGI, essentially? That's what I interpret this to mean. So that's all I have for today. I'd be happy to talk more if you have more questions. Yes?
When you talk about interacting with an environment for learning, in your own work, do you think that using virtual simulated environments is a useful methodology?
Absolutely. I think it's essential. It's essential because building robots is very expensive and time-consuming. Also, it's probably the case that you can save a lot of time by, if you're starting with a system that has to learn on its own, essentially, we're saying we're going to code by hand the mechanisms by which this system will autonomously figure out stuff, right? So if you have a system like that that actually can autonomously figure out stuff, the more complex and the more advanced the system is and the more complex stuff it can figure out on its own, the more useful simulations can be, because then you can run it, say, at 100 times the speed, or you can do tricks that you couldn't do otherwise. Of course, the target environment, if it's a robot you're building that should work in the real world, the target environment should map in all major respects or match the virtual environment. So, and building virtual environments that are good simulations of reality, or in fact, building simulations of anything is a lot of work. So, but nevertheless, I do think you will save some time, if not possibly enormous amounts of time, by putting your baby intelligence in there in a simulated world first. Yes?
My question is about environments too. You are talking, you described a lot about model of mind, about architecture of mind, and now I'm looking at it and having this question. But natural mind, it having not one environment. It acting not in one environment, but roughly saying in two encapsulated, because our body, we as we self, is an environment for our mind too. In robotics, it is actuators, it is things that do things and percepting.
Mm-hmm.
This how it divided traditionally. But will be it meaningful or useful to include one into another?
I'm not sure I follow you.
To act in reality or virtuality,
Mm-hmm.
you need a system of
Right.
perception and acting.
Actually, yeah.
Yes. And it is a system in itself. Without it is a system by itself.
Right.
Without any intelligence, and intelligence on top of it.
Yeah.
Should the architecture learn its possibilities first, learn how this system works for it, and then trying to do something with external things?
Oh yeah, so I think the question is basically how would you use a virtual environment for an AGI?
Yes, and where to build the broad between
the
self
interface
and self
yeah.
and
Well, so the interface
Right.
between the environment and the system, of course, is an arbitrary choice of the designers. But typically, let's just take the case of an AI that you then want to put into a robot body. Let's say you're using AGI to learn how best to rescue people from a burning building. Okay, there's no way that you're going to collect drawings of all the buildings in the city, that are perfect, and also people remodel. So it's not going to work like that. So the system has to have had experience with a lot of different varieties of interior environments, human behaviors, etc. What you typically do is you take the robot body that this thing will ultimately be in, you write simulation code that matches its mechanical properties, and you put that in the world as part of the world. And then that is where the interface to the AI happens. So, and the sensors as well. So you model the sensors. Let's say you have a souped-up Kinect sensor on your robot body. Well, you write a simulation of what the Kinect sensor provides as output. You try to make the output look as similar to the actual output of an actual Kinect sensor as the virtual Kinect sensor in this world, given the virtual environment, provides, right? So that then as a human looking at that, looking at the performance of the robot, you can see that, okay, it's that kind of building, but the robot did this, that was strange. Oh, I see why, because the sensor, was looking around the corner, etc., or it was glass like this, and it was heated by the fire, so its material properties changed, etc. I mean, the level to which you go in detail of how well to simulate will determine how directly you can take that AI and then put it into the robot. Now, there will always be discrepancies because simulating reality at a very fine level of detail kind of goes against the whole point of using a simulated world, because you want to skimp on some of the details because that gets you more quickly to some state of the broad picture. So you would use, to continue with this example, you would probably use the simulated world to have the robot learn, or the AI learn the general aspects of the layout of buildings, where the doors are, what counts as a window, etc. But not things like the glass breaks at 675 degrees Celsius or whatever, not to that detail, but at least the layout. So you can say, okay, well, you have a task of running through this building to the 7th floor. There's a person trapped there. Okay, you don't have the fire simulated perhaps, but at least it's starting to learn some part of the problem. And this is really the trick with developmental robotics, as this general line of thought is called, that it's essentially robots that develop their own intelligence. Is the problem or question of how do you bootstrap a baby AI?
And
right.
Concerning my question, there was a second area of it that what part of control should be in the cognitive architecture, and what part should be in some technical, in some supporting deduction planning and so on, because in natural case, if we're taking animals and humans, we don't think about huge amount of things that we are doing and that are going with us, with our blood, with our growth of hair and so on and so on. And when it comes to reality, there are cases when people think what we will be eating at the dinner, and there are cases when people think how to find food to the dinner. And it is very interconnected, but very different questions. They include they have similarities in the mechanism, but they have different layers.
Again, I'm not sure I follow you.
You say that is like a goal and it can be divided into sub-goals.
Maybe yes. The question is, where is this information that we are hungry, but we are going to choose food, but not to look for it. where this information should be. Should mind deduce? Should mind?
I think I see where you're going. So basically, that, as far as I can tell, deciding what information is given and what information the system needs to figure out.
What is explicit and what is implicit?
Yeah, what is explicit and what is implicit will depend to a large extent on the utility. What is the goal of using this AGI? That's not the same as the quests for building and understanding AGI. Because you can't really foresee which direction your research will be going necessarily. In fact, you hardly ever do. And so you need to look on many fronts at the same time. You can't really say, we're going to put this in the foreground and this in the background as far as these issues are concerned, because what's given and what... I would say, to keep it within the confines of this introduction lecture, the main decision that an AGI researcher needs to ask themselves is, how do I achieve the breadth? What do I think is the safest bet on the breadth of topics? I'm not going to include everything as far as human psychology is concerned. Obviously not. There are some things that are more important, but even if you can order them in a one-dimensional list from most important to least important, you need to pick somewhere along this, a threshold as your first attempt. So what is the smallest yet sufficient list of cognitive features that should be included, including given a new and sort of inferencing methods and all of these capabilities, so that I believe I will reach a useful output in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, which seems to be a fairly standard horizon in research. Any other? Yep.
We are speaking always about intelligence. We are taking this AGI, but not about personality, emotions, creativity. So it's important, I think, to model humans or synthetic humans.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. So the question is essentially creativity, emotions. What else did you mention there? Personality. Some people put emotions at the top of their research topics list. And they say, this is my primary topic, this is my focus. I don't know of any AGI people who think that emotion is a key or some sort of center to AGI, but maybe there are. Again, it's the same answer, actually. You have to, upon realizing that doing these tiny slices is not good enough, the next question is really, is it a square? How big is it? Or is it some weird shape? Okay? And how big is big enough? So that I get away from this problem of the AI effect. Or at least do something useful in AGI, in the topic of AGI, provide some sort of useful output that can be a stepping stone forward. It's a tough question. It's a very tough question. This is one of the things that people disagree the most about in the AGI community, I think. I don't know if were you paying attention? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about the emotion problem in ours in my last lecture. Yes, I will say just as a position statement, I think it's necessary for Even though, but that's, I agree with you, probably that's not a good starting point for your risk. But eventually you'll see you're going to need that. And also, basically, I will say the same for creativity, which is clearly necessary for general intelligence. But to start from that point is probably not a bad choice.
Yeah. So it's yeah. These are essentially, this is a good question. These are good questions, and basically, the only way to really answer them properly is to work on it and think about it long and hard, and then come to some conclusion about where you, as a researcher, want to do this, and what you put in the foreground, what you put in the background, and what you choose as a starting point. That's a very nice way of thinking about it. What's the starting point? So, for example, if I want to build a creativity machine, is creativity as a concept in itself a good starting point? Or is it better to think, well, to do a creativity machine, I need intelligence. And intelligence is a precursor to creativity. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you. I have my ideas about it. But as I said, with regards to creativity, I think it's very closely tied to intelligence, and you really can't get very far into, you can't climb very far on the AGI ladder until you start to see, oh, but this is very creative. In fact, Kasparov said about Deep Blue when he lost a couple of games that, yes, the only difference between this software program running on this hardware and the prior systems, AIs that Kasparov had played chess against before, was really just the speed. It wasn't the fundamental difference in architecture or software. But speed, in fact, quantity, in his view, had become quality, because Deep Blue did something that surprised him, took him by surprise as an experienced chess player. Now that's a pretty tough thing to do in a machine. And it may be the first time that ever happened, I don't know, or at least on that scale of media frenzy. But so, yeah, okay. Any other?
Can I ask something?
Yes.
I think that in terms of the definition of intelligence, it's still very debatable, especially when it comes to emotions and creativity. Some people would think that they are part of intelligence, but some of us don't. Say, for example, if you see two people fall into the lake, both of them are struggling, and you have to make a choice to save one of them. But one of them is your relative and the other one is not. So obviously you will save your, maybe not obviously, but most of people. Okay, most people would choose to save their relative. So is this an intelligent choice? We don't know. So, but I would say it's definitely an emotional choice. Whether we should include emotion into intelligence, into the definition of intelligence, I don't know. I don't think that there is a conclusive answer to that yet. And but then it also comes all the way back to the definition of intelligence itself. And I was thinking, is it goal specific? And then, because in your slide you mentioned that, I know that AGI is not application specific, so by goal I don't mean application, but because intelligence only become relevant when time and computational resource are finite. So time and computational resource are relevant when we have a goal. I don't know if my understanding is correct.
Yeah.
So in that sense, my understanding is intelligence is relevant to a goal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
AGI is goal
Yeah.
specific. And
Yeah.
yes, what is the goal of AGI?
Well, then the goal of natural intelligence is survival, if you could do it sort of in a backwards way, because it really wasn't, nature didn't ask itself, hey, how can I make sure that these living creatures survive better? It really is, I think of it more as a bottom. I don't believe in much of any of these ideas of afterlife or spirits or whatever. So I'm pretty much a materialist, but it may seem, and this is typically a problem for science, that when you start to talk about evolution, for example, it seems like there's a purpose. There was a purpose with having us evolve because we're the smartest and the best. And actually, we're the ones who are going to destroy the planet probably, but we haven't seen that end of the story yet. So, but it's kind of in a backwards way. It's an implicit goal, essentially. And so, with regards to your example of emotion or saving someone versus someone else, you have to make a choice. There's many ways to come up with very tough situations like that almost everyone will have a problem with and not be able to answer. But if they're there, they'll do something. They just can't figure out what they'll do. As far as survival as being the top level goal of intelligence in nature, implicit goal, I should say, I think emotion is essentially the same. And emotions in humans, as we experience them, you can think of them as having an experiential part and an effective part or an effect. So you experience emotions, and that's what we all experience. I can't experience your emotions, but I can infer from your facial expressions sort of, I think I know what your emotion is. It reminds me of this emotion I had. So this is the only way that I have to understand what emotions in you are like, right? But so that's the experiential part. I don't think we need that for robots. In fact, I don't really see how we can implement that unless it just so happens that once we have AGI, it will automatically have emotions, and then we'll have a metaphysical problem of explaining why. And then we'll have to go back to this thing and say, am I hurting it by pressing the space bar? And then there's the effect part, which is what effect do these emotions have on your behavior? Because that's really what does something in the world. And then when you have an emotion, you're angry, and you throw this at me, I hope not, then that will have an effect on me. And so Chalmers called this, he took great examples from his book on consciousness about zombies. These are essentially indistinguishable beings from humans, except they have no experiences. But you can't, from the outside, you can't tell. So it's an interesting thought experiment.
Yes. Actually, I agree that emotion is relevant to human intelligence if, say, our general goal is survival. Then emotion becomes relevant because it is like our input sensors to sense the world and then tell us what's right, what's wrong.
And in that case, saving your relative is probably the more intelligent choice.
Yes.
Because they're more likely to take care of you if you fall in the lake. So, you save the other guy and you fall in the lake the next day and you just drown. So it's, anyway. Yes?
You just said that you are not sure how your general intelligence will behave itself. You just said that you don't know if it will exhibit emotions or not. Don't you think that we should know before we build it? Don't you think we should use design methods which will allow us to, which will give us more knowledge about how it will behave itself?
That's a good question, but it's totally out of the scope, as much of this discussion is already, of this session. However, since I don't want to end on the drowning note, I will say this. To take an example, a historical example, did we have a good idea, did science have a good idea of what would happen if you build an atomic bomb and then it goes off? Yes. Did they build it? Yes. Was that a bad idea? Yes. If you're an ethical being, that's, I think, the conclusion you would come to. So in that sense, if we do know that we will cause suffering, like my friend Thomas Metzinger doesn't want to get involved with AGI because he doesn't want to increase the suffering in the world. Well, it just so happens that we have no idea right now, in the same way that the nuclear physicist had, that building one thing or another will lead to some pain or suffering. So at this point in time, it's way premature. But if at some point in time, we're pretty sure, like the nuclear physicists were, that if we build this, it will suffer. Should we build it? Probably no. At least if you ask me, if you put me in charge, probably I would say no. It's hard to imagine the circumstances in which I would agree, but it's possible. I don't exclude it. So these are very good questions, but they're way premature for the state of the art of AGI. They're interesting, but they're kind of out of scope. Yeah. Last question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, in the sense that I would disagree possibly with that, or look at it in another way, in the sense that I look forward to an AGI that can do everything that we hope for, including not go slow. The question is, and I do believe that that is possible, but it's one of those things that human intelligence is not completely tackled yet, right? So the average human has not yet worked out why do we live? Why is there a universe? And until these questions are put in the picture, however, I'd say overly ambitious, we may not be able to get the AGI that we are aiming for. So, there is the fact that what's the goal of the universe? What's the goal of the planets hanging of the stars?
There is no goal.
Until we know that, AGI may not get, so we should be very ambitious when doing this.
Good. That's a good note to end on. We should be very ambitious when we build AGIs. So thank you for today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Pei may have some announcements.
I have 2 points. One is the donor asked me to pass this information to everybody. He uploaded his material to the website also. So if you want to read ahead about open talk, so you can go there. And also because of the website information, I strongly encourage everyone to begin to use the website. And you can see there's already a couple of things on this market. Especially everybody should just post a 4D production about yourself, what you're interested in, and so on. They should actually do it here, it's just they have insufficient time, right? Like everything else. So that's one thing. Another thing I mentioned at the beginning of today, I can have an office hour this evening, but later I think maybe better to check first, if there's anyone really want to show up. Otherwise, it will not be very intelligent for me to be there in the first place. Okay, anyone may show up this evening in the office hours. Just let me know. Okay. It's posted on the website. It's another building. Another building. Say roughly 7 p.m. Then they can just have informal talk. Not only to me, okay, to each other. They can just have some kind of hangout. Yeah. In that case, I will be there. Okay. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning.
All the evening session.